First, just want to say a big welcome. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about source of funds and how to get the balance right. I will just introduce myself while people are filtering in because I'm the least important person here. My name is Rick. I'm the product marketing manager at Legal. Fairly recently joined the business, so this is actually exciting for me in many ways because it's my first webinar that I'm hosting. But also, in terms of source of funds, that's actually been one of the first areas I've really sort of dived into in terms of understanding what our customers need and what we're doing for them. So a nice opportunity for me to meet some other experts who are helping people with that area and also have a chance to talk about what I've learned coming into legal about what we're trying to offer people. But as we get everybody joining, I think it'd be great to just do a round of introductions. So we've got two great experts with us today, Kate and Eloise, both from Hive Risk. So Kate, maybe if I come to you first, do you want to just introduce yourself for anyone who's not met you before and talk a bit
Yeah,
about what you do?
absolutely. Thank you. So my name's Kate Burt. I'm the founder and CEO of Hive Risk, and we're a compliance consultancy for law firms, and we look after law firms all across the country, from you sort of sole practitioners all the way up to top 10 UK law firms, and we see it all. So we're in a really good place to talk about some of the challenges that law firms are facing. And I will just mention now, I know we were going to do this later on in the session, but I think it's a really nice time to mention now the sort of journey that we've gone on as Hive Risk with Legal, and also Eloise joining us as well. So Legal, I used to be head of risk and compliance for Legal back in 2022 when we were just starting Hive Risk. And in fact, that's how I met Eloise. Who was actually a customer working in-house for a customer of Legal's, and that's how we know each other. And fast forwarding today, Eloise has joined us as a head of risk and compliance, and this webinar here feels like a real full circle event. So it's really great and fantastic that we're still able to, as Hive Risk, work collaboratively with Legal. We really value the relationship.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thanks for that, Kate. That's a lovely story. And Eloise, congrats on your new role, first of all, but also do you want to tell us a little bit about, yourself and what you're looking forward to joining Kate at Hive Risk?
Thank you. Yes, so I'm the newest member of Team Hive Risk, having joined last week. So it's been a whirlwind, but I'm absolutely loving it. And prior to joining Hive Risk, I've worked in-house at several law firms in compliance functions. And firms that specifically deal with a lot of source of funds, source of wealth issues, lots of conveyancing. So I've sort of, bringing that in more recent in-house perspective, seeing it from both sides now that I've crossed over into consultancy. So yeah, good,
Fantastic.
good
Well, it's
team.
wonderful to have you both with us. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction to the topic. I think really the reason we wanted to dive into this today is just we know validating source of funds. It's been commonly cited as kind of a really important area for firms to focus on right now. There seems a lot more attention on it from the SRA, and there's some strong expectations on firms' approach to this area, really, in terms of complying with AML and all the other obligations that we have. So at Legal, I know we hear a lot about this challenge. Our customers are frequently telling us just it's a task they're really keen to get right. It's also quite a heavy burden on fee earners and staff sometimes. Sometimes can be quite a heavy burden on clients to understand why they're being asked for certain things and what they need to do. So we know people are working really hard to find the perfect balance on how to approach this. We wanted to, bring everyone together to have a good discussion about that, share some practical experiences on where we've seen success happen across the different places we've worked and the different customers that we work with. So I'm actually just going to start by kicking off a poll first, because just to help us a little bit later on, um, tailor our discussion around what you'd like to hear. We'd love to know what you feel is your biggest challenge with source of funds. So there should be some questions popping up on your screen now. Yeah, I can see people are starting to fill that out. So I'll leave that running while we just talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape in general, and then we can use that to maybe dive into areas that you're finding most challenging when we get to a little bit more sharing practical tips. Um, but yeah, I think let's bring Eloise and Kate in now because they're the ones who really know about this stuff, and I'm not. So, yeah, really, I think it'd be good to start just to kind of, I suppose, share with our audience why this is an area that's so critical for compliance, sort of why it's an area that they really need to be thinking about, and I suppose what the regulators' expectations are towards source of funds today, from your perspective. What are you seeing out there on the ground? And Kate, maybe if I come to you first, you could share a little bit of what you're seeing and what you think people should be focused on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the source of funds aspect of due diligence is critical because when we're looking at money laundering, we're looking at money moving. The whole purpose of the criminal activity is moving money and transforming money to look legitimate. So the source of funds aspect is actually critical to that, the anti-money laundering process. Where we find firms find this difficult on two sides of it, really. I think easier is for them to understand what's happening with the transaction. More difficult is to record thinking processes, evidence that thinking. And what we found over the years is that the SRA has become much, much more prescriptive on what they're wanting to see from firms. And I know because I've seen many firms, the way they approach this, it's not hitting the mark with the SRA. So you ask the fee earner to explain the transaction, to explain where the funds are coming from. They can give a coherent response. Look on the file, it doesn't marry up. Now, why this is critical now and the firms are feeling more pressure is over the last few years, and it's ramping up further in the last 12 months, is the SRA are being much more prescriptive on what they're expecting to see. And then they are following through with fines, publicizing outcomes, and firms are very much feeling the pressure, coupled with that increased scrutiny, but also the SRA has the resource and increasing resource to plow into the audit on there. Now I know Eloise was at the Law Society conference yesterday, so over to Eloise to say what are you hearing specifically from the industry yesterday.
Yeah, so it was pretty hot off the press from yesterday. I suspect we've probably got a few people on the call that were there as well, but unsurprisingly, it was a big topic of conversation. There were breakout sessions held in the morning and the afternoon, focusing on both large firms and small firms. And I think that in itself acknowledges that this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. You can't speak to somebody in a firm that looks nothing like yours, does not have a client base like yours, the resource of yours, ask them what they're doing and think, oh yeah, I'll just do the same. Like that's not going to hit the mark. And I think, where people struggle is, the regs don't say much. The guidance from the regulator is really what narrows down your risk-based approach, because there is quite a lot of guidance out there now, and it's getting comfortable with understanding what you're trying to achieve and then being able to justify and documenting that justification for why you've taken the approach that you've taken. Because as Kate said, the regulator indicated that it's not so much that they're not seeing it, albeit in some cases they're not seeing it, it's that the dots are not getting joined. And in those circumstances, you're doing the hard work, you're doing the legwork, you're getting the documents, you're spending the time, the desire to do the right thing is there, and then you're not getting the brownie points because you're not quite, squaring the circle, and making sure that everything's there that they're going to expect to see. I think we've all been in situations where I'm looking at a file and I think, well, I know you and I've worked with you for 3 years, so I can join these dots, but actually your file doesn't join them for me. So it's not good enough. It's not going to be what an external auditor is expecting to see. And that's probably what I'm going to start to see more now. I'm on the other side of the lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Eloise, obviously you just joined Kate from being in practice. So what's your perspective on, I suppose, um, the I guess the internal challenges within the firm? You were someone who was trying to bring that compliance expertise into your practice, use it for the benefit of all your colleagues, but what sort of different perspectives do you face internally, and what challenges has that brought up in terms of dealing with this increased scrutiny and pressure?
Yeah, I think when you're in house, so much boils down to that culture piece when it comes to your compliance culture. I should say that in all of the firms where I was compliance manager, source of funds and source of wealth was dealt with by the team. So whilst we had centralized onboarding in some of those firms, source of funds and source of wealth was dealt with by the teams at the coalface with input from myself and my team as required. But a lot of time needs to be spent in those circumstances building their confidence, building their knowledge. Generally speaking, lawyers are reasonably compliant people. They don't have a big issue with rules or processes. That's not the issue. It's that lack of understanding. Either they might be going too far. We see that too. I would like to stress we tend to focus on do more, do more, do more, but we sometimes have to advise like you're probably going too far and you're tying yourself in knots commercially. And it's building that confidence and the training piece that sits alongside that to make sure that those fee earners um, are equally as clear on what they're trying to achieve, both so that they can hit the mark you're expecting of them, but also articulate that to their clients because they're the ones having those conversations, whilst also bearing in mind they're not subject matter experts. This is a specialist area. There's a reason why Kate and I do what we do. Um, and so they have to have a certain level of knowledge, but you cannot expect them to be subject matter experts on all of this in a really specialist level of detail.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So I think, unless you guys wanted to add anything there, I think it might be good to start talking about in practice, how do we handle this? I'll bring up the poll results in a second, which are quite interesting, and maybe talk about some advice, I suppose, for different people, different positions, different types of firms. How do they build that culture? What they be doing to make sure that they're covering their colleagues' backs by having that specialist knowledge, and how to kind of convey that. We can get into all those things in a minute. I'm just going to share the results of our poll. So hopefully everybody viewing can see those. I'll read them out just in case we can't. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the most common answer is that all are equally challenging. So we know that there are many, many challenges to getting this right. So we'll make sure we cover everything broadly. But the biggest category on its own was really understanding that kind of what is enough question. So you mentioned there that you do commonly see, in many cases, people are trying to almost over-regulate, over-mitigate, do the sort of the absolute um, most intense process that they can, in the hope that that will kind of work for all scenarios. But that obviously has its pitfalls as well. So I suppose I'll just open it up to both of you, really, just to talk about some practical experiences you've seen
Yeah,
your
I think.
clients and colleagues employ that have helped with this.
Yeah, so what we see time and time again is a call out or a cry, a plea for, can we have a list of what we need? Can we have a comprehensive list that if I get that, that's our job done. Sadly, source of funds doesn't work like that, and it is often more an art than a science. Apart from the most simple ones where you're looking at perhaps an employment situation, the funds coming from employment, but anything more tricky than that, then it becomes an art in the fact of looking for where's the risk level, what are the facts specific, and then applying it to a level where it feels enough. Now, what feels enough will change from firm to firm, and it's really important to start from before we get to the line where the fee earner is trying to figure it out. It's actually going back from the firm deciding what is our risk appetite on this and where are we happy to sit. And there's not just AML considerations to think about as well. So I was doing an audit yesterday with a business, and it's actually an instruction to row back. We think we're doing too much. How can we row back? So I was looking at all the areas they could potentially row back on. And one example was on adverse media checks, that they're doing it manually. They're doing it on every single matter, whether it's high risk or low risk. And I said, Do you need to be doing that? Why are you doing that on every single matter? And they said, well, actually, the work that we do, we need to be really careful of the quality of customer that we on board. So for us, it's not just about AML risk there. We want to have the best quality client coming through. So that's why it must start with the firm. And it's not, you can't just look at the regulations, because there's more at play, and reputational issues as well. So starting there with the firm's risk appetite. Okay, what's okay for us? What's our, are we a risk averse firm, or, do we want to, are we happy to take more of those commercial risks while still being compliant, but actually we've got a stronger risk appetite. So it really does have to start from there. And then once the head of the firm is really clear on that, then you can start training those sorts of things with the fee earning teams. And what we see is that the fee earning teams want clarity. They want clarity in their decisions, and they don't want to feel, am I doing enough, or am I going far enough? They want to feel that what they're doing is correct. And sometimes it's workshopping some examples to get a feel of how far is enough, and for them to really feel confident in their own judgment calls on it. What it isn't is, here's a list of items that you need to get in these scenarios over, and that applies to all firms. So it's much more nuanced than that.
Anything to add on that, Eloise, from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think coming out of the conversations yesterday, a really interesting point in one of the panels was the psychology of your starting position when you approach this. Are you starting it from, my baseline is it's okay because I don't know anything yet. My risk assessment's not showing me any red flags. And I'm just checking that. Or am I starting from the position that everything is suspicious, and then I've raised that bar of where I'm trying to get to? And depending on where you start, that really impacts what that process is going to look and feel like for you and for your clients, and how long it's going to take. And there was a real mix in the room as to where people felt like their starting point was. And linked to that was the where necessary, which is the key wording that comes out of the regs. Is that a trigger, or is that a loophole? It should be a trigger, but some people are using it as a loophole. And again, it's that, where is your starting mindset when you're approaching this? And is that the same across your fee earning teams? Because even though your firm has a risk appetite, different people are more cautious than other people. So it's really understanding who you're working with, and trying to get everyone on that same journey together.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I think so. What I've heard from both of you there is kind of understanding that starting point and the risk appetite in the firm, and building from there is extremely important. So just to cover off, if we have anyone in the audience who's maybe early in their compliance career, and they're sort of that they're looking, how can I be of value to my firm? How can I kind of facilitate that? What practical tips would you share for, I suppose, how they can help maybe the senior people within their firm to come to that kind of understanding of the risk appetite, and then how can they work with them to get buy-in across the firm for that? Because we can all say our appetite's this at a management level, but I know from many roles I've done that you need lots of people then to really commit. So I think you mentioned workshopping things out, and obviously using those sort of methods to get everyone in the room. But what else have you seen being effective for someone who's really trying to, I guess, up their sort of impact in their role?
We see it often where, say, for example, a really talented compliance manager comes in from maybe financial services, and they come into a law firm and they know the rules inside out, and then they look at a scenario, and to them, from their background, it's very black and white, do not proceed. And we see in instances like that, there is a instant friction created with the fee earning teams, and also maybe the department heads, or the owners of the firm, the leaders of the business. If someone in that position, and being very specific on that sort of new role holder, is to have the conversations. If you're feeling that friction, and open up the conversations to begin with the fee earners as well as your seniors as well, to try and understand the firm's perspective on risk appetite, but also the firm's perspective on the commerciality of the decisions. And really the compliance manager needs to be on the same page as the firm on those issues. So what we're seeing is really that can really be make or break for that compliance manager if they don't understand the commerciality of the decision. And when a really good tip here when communicating with the fee earning teams is to show them you understand the commerciality, and to say, and we'll do this because we're in that position at Hive Risk. We are the compliance team for some firms, so we're in this position that we have to do this, is to say, look, we want to make this work. We're pro business. We want this deal to go through, but to keep us all safe, these are the regulations, and we need to find where that tipping point is, that where is the risk too risky. But showing the teams that you understand that the commerciality will get you lots of brownie points, to use Eloise's phrase earlier.
Yeah, that really ties in. I actually had a discussion with Helen Strachan, who's their practice manager at Burnett Reed, about some work we've been doing with them recently. She mentioned this as well, as really trying to get that mindset through, that the right compliance approach can really not only protect the firm from commercial risk, but also help make better commercial decisions, as in, do we even want to sort of go to the expense of having to go through sort of all this enhanced due diligence by taking this work on? Or is it more commercial for our firm to focus on maybe other areas where we are set up to be sort of profitable and fast and efficient, which is a really interesting angle that I heard about recently as well. Great. So I'm just going to switch maybe to some of the other areas that came up in the poll, and then we can turn to some questions, because we have some great questions coming in already. Another area we had here was just around confidence in analyzing financial records accurately. And I suppose I could interpret this two ways. It's partly maybe knowing, what should I be looking for? And then it's just sort of the actual ability to sift through all the information and get through the exercise. But how would you advise people on maybe to build confidence and get sort of that ability to analyze the information you get on source of funds effectively? And I can share some things that we're doing at Legal around this on the back of what you say as well.
I think you need to go back to that workshopping point, scenario based. Don't tell them, show them. Get in the weeds with them. You can't underestimate the benefit of being at the coalface with your people that you're asking to do this, and really understanding their position, the pressures they're under, what their days look like, and then having realistic expectations of their experience and the types of documents that you might see, because obviously we spend a lot of time talking about bank statements. Everyone's familiar with bank statements, but that isn't just source of funds, is not just bank statements. You could look at all different types of documents, which certain people may or may not be familiar with. Are you just assuming that someone knows how to read a tax return or knows how to read a policy document? Or one of my favorite ones from in practice is, I was doing a second pair of eyes on something, and I looked at this policy document and I said, "Is your client alive?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "You can only cash this policy in if they've died." They checked the numbers. The client said they were getting this money towards the transaction, and this element of it was coming from this policy, and the policy did contain that number if you just cross-check the numbers, but they hadn't analyzed the document and the conditions of the same. The client didn't even understand they couldn't cash it in. So that's a good example of, you can't just marry up the numbers. That's not what we mean when we're saying analyze it. You've got to be digging a bit deeper with that. But the person in question was, really young and really junior, and probably has never looked at a policy document in their life. And so it's a question of not going back and being like, did you not read this document? It's sitting down and going through. this is what it's telling you. And if you look here, this shows you, you know, some key information, and this is why that's important. And so what else do you know about your client that might feed into this picture? And it's walking them through that process and not just saying, computer says no, please go and try.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that really ties in with some of the things that I've heard since joining legal. And when I think about sort of how do you gain confidence in anything or lose confidence in anything, often it comes down to time and support. If you have the time to really get into the details of something and understand it properly, you're going to be more confident. If you've got a group around you and you know you have the support and expertise that you need, you're going to feel more confident in the outcome as well. And I think just to sort of talk about some of the ways we've tried to evolve legal solution here, on the time front, there are obviously your more common sources that you're examining with source of funds, like your bank statements, but they can still take ages to go through unless you kind of have the right support. So I know in our platform, we've put in a lot of effort to try and do some of the hard work in analyzing those more simple sources where you're looking for very particular things and extracting that information for people so we can highlight things like key trends in regular transactions, one-off deposits, the sort of things that we are trained to be on alert for quickly. And I think the other direction we're trying to move legal across the board is also just viewing it as a collaborative tool that can bring colleagues together. So you're not in there on your own. It is a platform that is giving you the opportunity to leave comments for each other back and forth, bring the conversation into something that's auditable and kind of get the support. So if you need another member of the team to say, you've got more experience with this kind of document, I'd love for you to take a look at it and kind of drop your thoughts or comments here so I can make a decision. We're really trying to work to make sure that we're giving people the tooling to make that happen very, very easily. But yeah, Kate, I'll come to you on this one just
Yeah.
before we move on to another one. What's your perspective on, I suppose, this area of gaining confidence and feeling like you can get to the
Yeah.
answers you need?
I think definitely. I think over the years, the legal tech space is improving all the time, isn't it? It's always iterating all the time. But that's something particularly in legal's product and just generally also is that there's been that real improvement in that collaborative, auditable function. I think there was a time a few years ago where you'd get the report and you couldn't annotate it, or you couldn't collaborate in that way. So I think technology is helping everyone, and also on the confidence front as well, is because you can it's so easy these days to fake documents. There's a noveltybankstatements.com. You can for pennies almost, you can buy fake bank statements, fake utility documents, etc. But using the right technology, it's actually verified on a much deeper level, so many sources checked and open banking, and that's
Absolutely.
absolute game changer compared to trying to look at a passport that might be fake with the naked eye, or maybe a photograph of a passport or a bank statement. And how really robust is that to check, is that fake or not, is that legitimate or not? So I think just in terms of the use of technology, it's just a massive advantage on gaining that surety.
Yeah. And I suppose a big reason people will come and team up with you guys is to have that extra level of confidence. So what sort of questions do you find people are typically most concerned around when they're coming to you on the source of
Yeah.
funds, I
So
suppose, what they're facing?
so different firms use us in different ways, and it could be that they don't use us, but then this particularly tricky one has come on their desk, and they want, it's almost like a turbo drive file note for their audit to say, actually, we've outsourced this and they've said they're comfortable with it. So that's but because even our judgment isn't foolproof. But it is that extra step to show, do you know what, we have gone that extra step and they're confident with it as well. So some of the examples on some things that we're instructed on in that way is a common one is the crypto source of funds. So clearly, if it's like £500, it probably wouldn't come to us. The firm would probably make a judgment call. But where we're looking at millions that's been raised over crypto trading, and perhaps the firm has worked, it's a really good client of the firm. They usually don't touch crypto, but they want to keep the client, but it's beyond their expertise and also risk appetite. We'll sometimes get those instructions because we work with a specialist crypto analyst who can sort of interrogate that and go back with some confidence. So a couple of examples, saying with one firm particularly, they'd sent 2 instructions through in a close period of time, and one we went back and said this all checks out, no problem, and on the other one we said actually this potentially looks like a money mule. So do what you feel best here. But that's an example where very quickly we're able to, with our expertise, add confidence to their decision making. So something that maybe they would have made maybe turn the client down or spent hours and hours in the boardroom, shouldn't we, actually we can cut through that and say, with our experience, here is the red flags. Other areas where we're often instructed, anything overseas, to be honest, but also Chinese funds from China, and anything Hong Kong as well. We get quite a few instructions in relation to that, but because our team have seen and understand the local customs, we can give that clarity and that reassurance much faster than if firms are trying to work it out on their own.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I think let's spend a couple of minutes just talking through this kind of last category that's come up for a lot of people, and then I'll open it up to some of the audience questions because we've got quite a few good ones that I'd love to dedicate some time to. So that one other area that did come up for quite a few people is just reducing burden and friction for the client, dealing with pushback. I'll come in on this one a little bit once I've given you guys a chance to give your take, because I think it's another area where legal's seeing, that the technology we're building can be a real game changer for this. So I'll talk a bit about what we've done, but what do you see on that? And I know, Kate, in your recent article, you were talking about how getting compliance right can really help because it is impacting that first client onboarding experience. It affects their first impression of the firm. But to both of you, really, I suppose, just some experiences on this and dealing with it effectively.
So Eloise, would you like to start? And then
Yeah, from an in-house perspective, I think what speeds it up is it's the quality of the communication. So both the quality of communications with the client, and I always used to try and encourage people to, instead of giving that shopping list, which sometimes you can do, but sometimes you can't, explain to the client in the simplest possible terms where you're trying to get to. So they can think, oh, well, actually, they've not asked for that, but because they've explained where they're trying to get to, I think they're going to need this document. So I'm just going to provide it now, along with the 3-point shopping list that they've given me. That speeds things up. And then when you're referring things on, be it, externally to a consultant, to your compliance manager, how many times do people on this call get an email? Is this okay? Question mark. And then you open the PDF and it's 85 pages. You know, I don't know, is it? You need to be clear in what you've got, what view you've formed, and what you are or are not concerned about. Because the more thorough you could be in that initial communication, the more likely is that the recipient is going to be able to answer it in one go. Email ping pong wastes so much time, so much time. And then they go, you may recall 3 weeks ago, we sent you an email about, and if you're a compliance manager, you're thinking, I don't know what I did 3 hours ago. I've had so many emails. So it's just that all trying to work together to help each other get to where you want to be as quickly as possible. And that's a team effort.
Yeah, 100%. So you're preaching all the things that I learned first when I came through to legal and started working on this area, because uh, our team was working on this as a really big focus: is how can we get the process into something much more manageable for the end client, so the law firm isn't carrying a lot of the can for email back and forth, having to explain, re-explain things. A lot of people were struggling with this. So I mean, one thing I will just say is it's amazing the success we've seen in creating that more dynamic workflow that you can ask clients questions in ordinary ordinary plain English language, about their transaction, how they're funding it, and the technology is very effective at then kind of proposing to them what they likely need to do, guide them through the process step by step, And I mean, just as I guess a user of technology who isn't necessarily a technical whiz myself, just having that kind of that structured way through that I can be guided through step by step, a little bit of hand holding without the firm needing to sort of take on all of that or have a massive sort of customer services staff on board, which we know most people don't necessarily have the resourcing to provide. They want the fee earners focused on delivering the value that they really want to focus on in the advice. And yeah, I mean the speed with which clients are coming through the system since we've introduced some of these changes with yeah, with sort of the kind of the AI driven questions and making
And
sure that we
that's so
can
valuable
yeah
in-house when
yeah
you've got the data to go back to your board to be like, this is how much quicker I can onboard somebody. This
yeah
is how many people are completing onboarding out of hours. So by the time you log in tomorrow morning, it's done. Or like you can't be that data in when you're presenting it is neat, it's easier to understand,
yeah yeah.
you know,
And
it's
I
really
think the
helpful.
automated reminders you mentioned as well, just kind of we all forget stuff. We all have busy lives. But every time that this sort of drags on, it's delaying work, it's creating frustration. Just having something there to take care of that without you having to worry about, I think is a huge win across the board too. Um, so I think maybe let's turn to the audience questions now and see if we can maybe answer some specific questions for people. So we've had quite a few come in. I'll just pose a few to you, Eloise and Kate, if that's okay. Um, but so the first one that's come in, I think we maybe touched on this to some extent, but one of our audience members is just asking, in terms of balancing being risk-based and consistent across different practice areas. So, for example, property versus private client, where people may have different risk appetites, different approaches required. Um, is it that centralizing client onboarding team to one team that works best from a risk perspective, or do you recommend sort of different approaches? How have you seen firms navigate that successfully, I suppose?
Yeah, it very much depends on how the firm wants to approach it and what they've already got set up. So there's not one answer on this, but we've seen it work successfully in a number of ways. One, a mutual client actually that we work with, that we've worked with over a couple of years to get this right, is what they've done is there's a different workflow or a different guide for the different departments. It's still centralized compliance, but there's those different levels. There's sort of a minimum standard across everyone, but then there is that, with whether it's say for example settlement agreements in employment department will have a different standard of due diligence to the commercial property team, for example. So it's about getting the guide right, getting the approach right for each department, and then making sure the compliance team is trained, or whether if it's decentralized, making sure the relevant teams know the difference. The difficulty or the potential trap with something like that is making sure the safeguards in place for if a low risk client moves to a high risk area, and making sure that's picked up. So that's a real challenge. So if they're onboarded in employment, they don't then change their instruction, or the next instructions of a high risk matter, and they haven't had the right level of due diligence. But your matter risk assessment, that's the key there. So each new matter should really look at from scratch, really, have we done the right due diligence here? How far do we need to go? So that works really well. Other firms, and it depends on how complex structure your firm is, but some firms just say, do you know what, let's just apply the same across everything, because then we know what we're doing. But increasingly we're being asked to consult on how can we streamline and reduce compliance where it's not needed to be as a robust level.
Brilliant. And Eloise, I think you touched on a few earlier actually, but someone has asked us kind of what are some common red flags that often get missed in routine cases. So I was thinking of your policy document example there, but what other things do you guys see coming up that people maybe quite often get tripped up by?
I think people often dive straight into the documents without taking a pause to stop and think about what they might be looking for.
Mm.
again, when I've done, even, when I've been in-house and I've been talking to teams, and I throw open the floor and I'm like, what might you be looking for? What might the red flags be? And it can be quite worrying sometimes how few people can come up with on the hoof. But I think it's because they are trying to jump to the end point, and it's that time pressure that they're under. They think, I just need to get all of this reviewed and know if I can go ahead because it's holding up the transaction. And so they're looking for the big the big jump off the page ones, but it's those smaller patterns and trends, like that small point and that small point might not individually be red flags, but those two things together with the fact that your client is based in a certain high risk third country, or there's another risk trigger, that when you start to build all those puzzle pieces together, that's when you hit the red flag territory. And if you're not pulling that all together into your risk assessment in one place, that pattern might not jump off the page to you.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Kate? Also not reading the documents. So seeing that is, okay, we've had 6 months bank statements in, good, tick, put the 6 months bank statements on file. Have you read them? Have you looked at them? So there's that, actually not reading the documents, but also, as Eloise says, jumping to documents as the answer rather than actually what's the question, what's the explanation, and then the documents verify the explanation. And that's how it should work. You shouldn't start with, let's have the documents and then see what questions we've got. So for example, maybe you've got 6 months bank statements on file, you've ticked the box, move on, but the client said they're getting the money from inheritance. You've got the wrong documents. And then another red flag is just be so careful with fakes, with forgeries. And that's very, very difficult, to be honest with you. So where you're looking, that's where you've got to be looking at the wider picture. What else do we know about this client? Because I think that the so sophisticated, some of these forgeries, that you're not going to spot it. So it's about being aware.
More being on high alert when there's something else about the client that you need to be sort of mindful.
And knowing that, not to question every single document you see, but having in the back of your mind, this might not be, documents aren't self-proving unless it's linked to open banking or cross-reference with other sources. You just knowing that just because you've got a bank statement doesn't mean it's a real one.
Yeah. Well, that's actually ties into another question I think I can answer fairly quickly, if not completely sort of on the money accurately for legal side, which is someone's asking, what is the take-up rate of clients allowing access to their bank account via open banking? So I will say we've put in quite a lot of time to try and make this easier and just more appealing for clients, because we know for many people it's not something that they're super familiar with. So we've seen actually rates rising. I know that at least at last time I saw the data, it was more common for our clients to use open banking to share financial records than it was not. So I think we were seeing around 60 to 65% of transactions coming through via that method. Now I think that is on the rise. I don't know how that tallies with firms across the board, but I think that's what we've been seeing, and it is increasingly a way that clients are comfortable using. But another one I want to just bring in you guys on that's come from our very own James Pearson here, actually.
Hi, James.
So thanks for the question, James. And I think this is just a good one to discuss, I guess, how you balance the use of technology, bringing in additional expertise like Kate and Eloise, and the firm's own policy. So it's really a question about like what's a good balance between relying on tech and others versus fee earners' own decision-making power, the firm's policies. I'll quickly say, I think from my perspective, I think we will often have the conversation about this in terms of inside legal. A lot of our goal is really about empowering decision making. So it's taking away all the time spent on the stuff that technology is really good at, and actually then putting you in a position where I'm in a much better standpoint to make my decision. I have the information more clearly in front of me. And a lot of the things we've brought out, like risk assessments, which have been mentioned, like source of funds, like the collaborative tools we're pulling in, is more actually making it easier for people to step up and sort of bring their own expertise in rather than getting stuck on the things that don't necessarily empower them to do that. But how do you guys see it in terms of the, where technology is at right now, what you try and provide, how much firms should rely on their own judgment, for what?
Yeah, I think the firm's fundamental is the firm's own judgment. Fundamental, that is, the buck stops with the firm, and where technology and consultancy fits in, we are tools in your armory to help you do that. So I do feel there is an over reliance on technology generally. If you've got that green tick, fine, move on. And so I do think it's that understanding the buck stops with us, it's our judgment call, but let's lean on technology, let's lean on consultancy to embolden our approach and make sure that we're making the best decisions to keep ourselves safe and also efficient.
And get that documentation piece so we can demonstrate it as well. I think that's
Yeah,
something that's
100%.
huge.
Yeah.
Eloise, I don't know if you had an additional thought on that one.
Yeah, I think we do see that a lot in-house, that over-reliance or lack of understanding of what the tech does and doesn't do and can and cannot do. And your fee earners need to be able to explain what is on their file, and be able to justify the position that has been adopted. So the tech and the output from the tech can springboard that forward and springboard it forward like quite efficiently in some cases, but it's not going to come and be you. It's not going to make that decision, and it's not going to absolve yourself of that responsibility. Same if you're fortunate enough to have an in-house compliance team that's centralizing, they are going to need input sign off from the fee earning team involved as well. You cannot just completely outsource all of your responsibility or regulatory requirements and be like, that's a you problem. It just doesn't work like that.
That's nice. So I think a couple more questions I'll try and fit in. I want to get to as many of them as we possibly can. Interesting one, just moving away from source of funds here, is just given the SRA's general focus on enforcement around AML and other areas, do you guys have any sort of expectations on what the next kind of area of scrutiny they're going to really hone in on would be? What insights can you share around that?
Just generally, we'll all see in the breaking news the SRA's non-response really on the client account move. They're looking at abolishing client account, and they did the consultation which closed February. So I expect there to be some more movement in around client account. We've certainly seen from our consultancy work this year that SRA are looking under the bonnet more with firms on client account, residual balances, and also financial viability, particularly in the wake of the sort of the PCP and the mass claims and group actions. We're seeing a lot of focus there, so we expect that to continue. Also, we'll have seen, and perhaps Eloise, you might want to comment on this more, but the case involving litigation and conducting litigation, is it Muzar case? I expect that to, I mean, that's sort of hot off the press, isn't it? And I don't think a lot of firms have picked up on yet how potentially problematic that might be in terms of non-qualified staff conducting litigation. But Eloise, I don't know if you want to add to that one.
Yeah, that was obviously, there was a lot of chatter about that yesterday. It wasn't on the agenda, it's too hot off the press, but
Yeah.
obviously in all of the coffee breaks, everyone was having a bit of a debrief. And I think the SRA guidance on the implications or potential implications of that case are going to be, we're going to need them quick, and they're going to dictate whether we're talking ripples here or tidal waves in terms of knock-on effect. I mean, I understand why people feel like it's coming at them from all angles, because it really is. I think we're going to hear more from the SRA on training and competency. I think we're going to hear more from them on their expectations when it comes to ethics. Ethics in the sector is a massive hot topic, and often, I I think a lot of people think that a lack of attention on that particular area has led to some of the pickles that we're in now, and addressing the ethics point would get ahead of any more of them. So there's a lot going on.
There certainly is.
Yeah, always a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably getting pretty close to time. I'm going to wrap up, maybe ask one more question before
Can
we...
I highlight one that's come on, which
Course.
I'm
Yeah,
happy
yeah,
to
yeah.
answer?
Yeah.
So there's clients tend to get quite nervous, reactive when
Yes.
requesting further
That's
documents,
the one
and
I was
how
getting.
much can we tell them without essentially tipping off? So
Mm.
it's important to know that the tipping off offence is only when you let slip that there's been a report to the NCA, so that could prejudice the investigation. Essentially, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying to a client, we've got strict requirements, we've got high due diligence requirements, so we have to ask these questions, and if it doesn't make sense, we can't pass you through because you're not going to meet our threshold. So talk in terms of your due diligence requirements rather than suspicions. Never say that looks suspicious, or don't go into those territories. It's all about, we've got a high standard for due diligence at this firm, or blame the policy at the firm. Our policy requires us to meet a certain minimum. So you're pointing to the policy, not to the suspicion as such. And that's because, and sometimes once that NCA report's been done, then it gets very, very tricky. Why are you not responding to us? Why are you not progressing this? Then real care has to be taken. And if you're the individual receiving that call from the client, do not say anything without having it cleared from your MLRO. You don't want to trip up on that kind of pressure, because it can get pretty heated in that scenario.
Yeah, that's great. And I think actually we know this is an area a lot of people are nervous about. What one thing we will be sharing actually in the follow-up email to the webinar is Legal have just created a bit of a plain English guide to why law firms need source of funds. So if you don't have resources you rely on already, and you need something that's just very sort of general to make clients comfortable on why you might be doing this and what sort of things you might need, I think we will be sharing that in as a resource that you can download and apply your own branding. So if it is useful for you in dealing with any questions you get from clients on that front, that might be something that you find useful as something to lean on.
Just a comment in there about specific example and what's enough, i.e. patterns and trends, not just an overview of the tech. Pointed question there. So I felt like we were discussing that as we're going through, but perhaps if we can summarize that. So I mean, from my perspective, what's enough and what are the patterns of trends? It's going back to what I said before. It's not a list of things. What it is an understanding of what is happening in this transaction. And once you've got that explanation, it's documents to support that. Now, what's enough is, and you start from a position of curiosity. What is enough? Okay, so they've said the money's coming from inheritance, and they've sent me through a pretty robust document from their solicitor, previous solicitor, to show that actually I'm satisfied with that. Probably stop there. When that comes back, there's something suspicious there, or something doesn't add up, you need more, for example. And it's following that collection process until you feel like my curiosity is piqued, or my curiosity is satisfied rather, and I'm not suspicious. If at any point through the collection of that evidence you still feel suspicious, and it's a very subjective thing, then you carry on until the point that actually it may be that your suspicion is still there. It's not enough to make a report to the NCA, but actually it does not make commercial sense to keep gathering information. Then you might make the commercial decision that actually, no, we'll draw a line there. It hasn't met our threshold. I don't know, Eloise, if you wanted to add to any specific patterns or practical guidance.
I think sometimes it's helpful to make sure you've got the right oversight on all of the clients' matters. So when I was in house, I'd see quite a lot. I'd see a name and I think I've looked at something on this source of funds, and I'd see like what other files have we got open or have we had open in the last 12, 18, 24 months, and is there a pattern in those property transactions, or are we relying on the same source of funds that have actually been relied on for like multiple transactions and actually they should have run out. And sometimes the fee earners don't have that level of oversight of the bigger picture. So that's something that can sometimes get overlooked as a pattern and trend, because you're not going to see that just in the documents on your one particular matter.
Amazing. Thanks so much, both. So I think probably we're getting close to time, and I want to just have a little bit of time for housekeeping at the end. So um, I think maybe just if we just to quickly share a couple of key takeaways from today, and we can run through how people can get in touch with you guys if they'd like to after the call. I'll run through how they can do more with legal. But I suppose my key takeaway from today, I think what hearing you guys speak was just really bringing home how much you need to focus on your firm's own risk appetite, your own risk policies. There's not any catch-all answer out there, unfortunately, from the regulator. And equally in the use of tech, I think it's brilliant to bring it in and to make that whole process easier for you, make it quicker, document it very, very effectively, but viewing it as a way of empowering your firm to feel confident in making decisions, getting things right, and being able to display how you do things to, I suppose, both your clients and the regulators, everybody who you want to show that you meet the highest standards too. But Eloise, Kate, maybe just a line on what you'd leave people with today as a kind of key advice to take away from the discussion.
Eloise, do you want to start? Because the neighbours come to the door and the dog's going crazy.
That would normally happen to me. I think, for me, what was the most effective lesson I learned when I was in-house is just spending that time with your teams, with the people that you clash with on a day-to-day basis. You need to find that common ground, that investment in time and energy, and hear them out. No, they're not your regs. No, they're not your rules. No, it's not your legal you've not made them up. It's not your compliance officer's fault. But people need to be heard, because actually you might identify a tension that you're overlooking because you've never done that job. And that's the breakthrough that's going to make everything run smoother. So, like, I just can't stress how valuable that is.
Yeah, and chiming in on that really is, if you feel as though it's getting into email ping pong, just pick up the phone. Either, and I mean that for internal teams as well as to the client. Like, the client will get very frustrated, and do you know what, a telephone call just to understand the background could just clear everything up and reduce that tension very, very quickly. And I think that's my advice generally in life, is pick up the phone and don't get into back and forth on emails, because it's never good for anyone.
That's a great tip. All right, so let's wrap up. First, Kate, Eloise, thanks so much for joining us. It was amazing hearing all your insights on this topic. If people would like to get in touch with you and take the conversation further on how they can sort of benefit more from your expertise, how would people do that? What would you like to?
We're both very prominent on LinkedIn, so
just
connect
shoot
with
me
us on there
a
if you
message.
don't. So I know Eloise is prolific in her updates, particularly on what's happening in compliance. Really, really engaging stuff. So if you're not following Eloise already, then do. I say stuff on there as well. But also we've got hiverisk.com, and we've got newsletters that we put out. So things like webinars like this that we're doing, we'll let you know about that. So check us out on hiverisk.com as well.
Brilliant. And I think in case anyone hasn't seen, I did just send a poll live. So if you'd like to get in touch with legal and actually have a demo of our platform, just to explore more some of the things that I was sharing about what we've been doing, you can answer that. We will also be emailing everybody after the webinar. We will drop that source of funds client explainer in there that I mentioned as well. So you can also just get in touch with us directly on that email. Or a lot of us are also very active on LinkedIn. So any legal team member, I'm sure, would be happy to hear from you at any point. I'll also just call out just before we finish, we do have some conferences coming up in Bristol on the 5th of November and Manchester on the 12th of November. We're running a legal leaders live conference where we'll be talking about all the different challenges that we're facing across compliance, much more discussions like we've had today. I'm sure Kate and Eloise will probably be seeing them there as well. So it'll be a great chance to connect. And I would love to see lots of you there too. So you're very welcome to join. Kate, were you going to
Yes,
add?
I am. I'm being opportunist here, but we're doing a roundtable tomorrow in Manchester and a breakfast meeting. So if anyone's on here from Manchester and you're in Manchester, it'd be a great get in touch because we've got a couple of spaces there, and we're going to be. I know Peter Hibbert, our commercial director, has a slideshow on that case we mentioned before about litigation and reserved activities following the recent judgment. So please do get in touch if you're in Manchester or can get to Manchester for about 8, half 8 tomorrow morning.
Super. Sounds fantastic. So yeah, lots of opportunities to connect. But with that, I will probably wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you found it really valuable and you were able to take away something that will help you in your challenges over the next few months. And please do reach out if you'd like to get any help from any of us in the future. So thanks so much.